Well, we have got quite the pot of Sasquatch stew cooking. Got some talking points that we want to touch on today. Everything from aliens, lost civilizations, biblical history, government cover-ups, just a whole entire plethora of different things to touch on and talk about. Welcome back to Arkansas Bigfoot, everybody. Great to see you today. Well, we have got quite the pot of Sasquatch stew cooking. Got some talking points that we want to touch on today. Everything from aliens, lost civilizations, biblical history, government cover-ups, just a whole entire plethora of different things to touch on and talk about. Before we do, if you haven't already, take a minute to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. That way you can keep up with everything that Junior's doing out in the woods with his moon pies and sardine treats. I think before we jump down the rabbit hole into all of those topics, I'd like to talk about the weather. Well, you know, over the past couple of years, there's been a huge influx of Bigfoot activity from Oklahoma on east.
Yes.
Oklahoma, Arkansas, basically draw a line up through there and go east. A huge influx of migration, so to speak.
Right.
Well, they're predicting this year in the western half of the United States the most relentless drought season that they've had, and this has been a perpetual, ongoing increase year by year by year. And you can see by looking at the images just how drastically they predict that to be.
But it is cyclical when they do.
Right. And I'm sure this isn't anything new. It's probably been repeated over and over again throughout history, where they'll move to one area or one location over another for a time until it levels out. But I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, and especially the ones living in the western states, because according to what they're saying, it's going to be a pretty dry, pretty rough season for you. A lot of fires.
Definitely have to stay aware. And I do believe that the people adjust according to cycles and understand them very well. And water is important to them, of course.
Water's important to everything.
Everything that lives, so they're going to do what they have to do. And
so you would have to be living under a pretty large rock to think that the powers that be don't have an idea about what Sasquatch is. Between the alphabet organizations, deep state institutions, and this is not just our own government, this is all
global.
over the place.
Private individuals.
Science project groups, experimentation that's funded by a lot of these bottomless pit institutions that if they try to brush it off and tell you they don't know what's going on, they're blowing smoke up your pahoot. To your pahoot. That's exactly what it is. They know exactly what they're looking at. They've known it for a long, long time.
And there's a number of these organizations, the way that Anku has shown it, that make themselves look like they are for the people, but they aren't actually for the people at all. They're collecting data. Trying
to get DNA samples so they can do experimentation, different types of cloning, which is going to tie into some of the other topics that we're going to talk about later on.
So I feel like what's really sad about that is that, we've talked about the type 3s, maybe those that are more base or less evolved. They may even suffer with certain mental deficiencies or handicaps due to inbreeding or other things. And with that said, if they even are able to obtain these individuals, it's not going to be those that we know to be the highest vibrational or those that are the most skilled at being who they are. And the only thing that they would really have to gain from that is the raw physical strength or, certain facets of DNA that wouldn't be what the people are about.
No, absolutely. If they got their hands on anything, it would be a broken tricycle instead of a muscle car.
Exactly. So I do feel that there are a lot that are in hot pursuit of these, but I'm not sure they're having the success that they might want people to think they are, or, through the measures that they're using. And they do keep opening up technologies and things that, might help them. But I just feel it's a perpetual struggle.
One thing that is a given, and anyone that has been around any type of Sasquatch activity or any kind of experience with that realizes in short order that they can manipulate any type of electronic device that's out there. It doesn't matter what it is. If it is an electronic device, they can shut it down, scramble it up.
Remove what they don't want. We've had audio removed. We've had certain portions of video that just, scrambled up and gone. The other thing that they can do, even the higher vibrational ones, if they need to, is use that infrasound in such a way that does create those defenses for them, or create maybe a mind state out of their pursuers. Unless they have found a way to defend against that, they're just really fighting and wrestling with something a lot bigger than they might realize.
I kind of liken it to trying to catch the wind with a butterfly net. It's a futile effort. The Sasquatch are highly skilled at staying aloof.
Yeah, and they want to walk in that tree and go, they're going to do it. If they hang out for the, sheer experience of it, and just to defend territory or make a statement, they'll do that too.
So in North America, we call them the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch. Himalayas, they call them the Yeti. Australia has the Yowie. Europe, they call them the Wild Man. Britain, it's the Woodwoes. In parts of Alaska, Russia, Siberia, it's the Giant Hairy Man. course, there's smaller versions all over Asia. Like the soldiers that came back from Vietnam reported a smaller version of the American Sasquatch that they saw over there. Now, there's traces of it that are hinted at as far back as we can discover through ancient civilizations, but they all share a very, very common thread regardless of what name you call them. And that falls in line with the rest of the conversation today about a horse of a different color or a rose by any other name. It's a natural reaction for people to always try and label what they don't understand. I guess it's just too uncomfortable to leave something hanging loose as being an unlimited potential. If it doesn't conform some way to a uniform measure, then surely, by our primitive lizard brain logic, it must be evil or threatening to us. That is a very terrible way to think about things when you think about it. I think most of the time humans can be their own worst enemy in their failure to understand something that's strange or different than what they encounter on a daily basis.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They'll make it 10 times what it was.
Topics like ancient aliens, origins, lost civilizations, religious aspects that include all belief structures, topics we normally kind of dance around because, well, let's face it, it's too uncomfortable to explore for most people. They get emotionally attached to an idea or someone else's idea, and they're invested in that so deeply we can't even realistically fathom how many conflicts have been waged over idealism of religions and philosophies.
Yeah, ironically, politics, particularly and things like that, rate less than personal belief structures, particularly pertaining to belief systems.
So today, let's try a little exercise. Let's try to look at all of this with an open mind, free of the emotional attachments to conformity. And most of you that are watching this video today are coming from some type of foundation from a Judeo-Christian background. Generations of storytelling, dogmas, and rhetoric. You're taught to view the world and believe in certain ways that fit a narrative. The same can be said about every other form of religious belief system from the Far East, Middle East, Egypt, Africa, South America, Native American traditions, and so on. Regardless, though, of what your philosophy is, there are common threads in the historical accounts regarding the beginnings of man as we know it to be. One key that you have to understand is that the verbiage or terminology used by various ancient races and religions are in direct correlation to the words and phrases they were familiar with at the time. The words that they had to describe things that happened in their daily existence.
Agreed. And a lot of the perceptions that they had were difficult to explain. They were seeing things that didn't have reasonable explanation, and what they might have described as a chariot or fire on a chariot or something like this was just their way of saying they saw something mechanized that had propulsion, it had wheels, it had, things that they understood, but it wasn't necessarily an exact description of what they were seeing.
One of the things that keeps reoccurring over and over again are the descriptions of sky gods, sky spirits. It's very common terminology used by the ancients from every corner of the globe. It was the best word that they had to describe something that seemed completely supernatural to them, based on their level of technology and awareness at the time. Ancient texts and oral traditions are absolutely riddled with stories that describe sky gods coming down and interacting with man, teaching them technologies, information about the solar system, just so many different advanced ideas for that age. Things that would seem to them to be godlike abilities. When you stop and think about it, it's no accident that we went from a hunter-gatherer society to building city-states, utilizing mass agriculture, creating organized civilizations all in the blink of an eye, as far as timelines and evolution are concerned. When you look at the greater span of all of it, all of that seemed to just pop up like a mushroom.
Yeah.
And through various ancient texts, we've learned that the sky people also experimented with breeding programs, artificial insemination, DNA manipulation, and then just like that, they seemed to disappear from the scene. They were gone from the narrative, or were they?
Exactly. And even for those that have strong biblical background, if you look back, Enoch, Ezekiel, they very much dealt with what we call an angel, which was Uriel, and one was shown an overview of, say, the Middle East, another was shown an overview of what we consider to be cosmic, and very much both described what we would know and recognize to be a ship, but they didn't have verbiage for that. So it bears, to reason that a lot of these experiences have been happening for eons and eons of time, but there just hasn't been the wording that we can recognize in order to understand this and to eliminate a lot of our fears, because the majority of those energies have not been here to hurt us but to help us.
Okay, so here's another word or label that keeps getting thrown around, especially in the Bigfoot community lately. It's the label of Nephilim. Once again, some people feel that it's necessary to label what they can't comprehend, and they insist on trying to turn it into something evil. It's funny, though, that beyond the story of David and Goliath, the word Nephilim was barely even a whisper of a mention in centuries of accepted texts. But then when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in our modern times and they translated the Book of Enoch, it talks about the Watchers and how they intermingled with humans and created a separate race.
And even to this day, if you look at that, you look at the Greek gods, Zeus, Poseidon, these huge, unbelievable energies, and even so much as having what you'd consider to be a War of the Titans. Historically, I believe that those were the original Nephilim, if you will. They had the ability to procreate. They had the ability to be in both realms. They had the ability to utilize genetics in order to create specific results. And if you actually study Greek mythology, you begin to see that the real Nephilim are not a giant in what we term to be a giant. They are truly huge and multidimensional in their energy and in the way that they function.
Yeah, most of the Sasquatch, regardless of what part of the globe they're reporting them from, on the average are between 7 foot and 12 to 14 foot, with a few exceptions reaching around 15. Most of the Nephilim giants started at that 15-foot height and went up beyond there.
Most of them a minimum of 20, 30 feet tall. Minimum.
But it's just absolutely curious to me and bizarre how people today are so quick to call the Sasquatch a Nephilim. It makes no sense to my mind. They're not thinking it through.
And I think what strikes me odd, particularly after having worked with this family, with Unku, for me personally, I have never had anything that I considered truly malevolent or, quote, evil, try to teach light in a way that leads to growth, in a way that creates a greater connection to Source. I don't recall ever having an energy such as that wasn't truly manipulative or trying to create negative emotion in order to feed itself. I've never seen it heal. I've never seen it inspire us to different levels of greatness from within on a very spiritual level. So it's very hard for me to personally get my brain wrapped around the experience that we've had, especially as being anything but blessed, particularly due to those factors alone.
You know, when you're looking at a lot of these ancient stories and texts, it's curious to me how closely the narrative resembles ancient Sumerian, like the Anunnaki, or similar accounts from Mayan traditions or Hindu traditions, Native American stories, the Aborigines in Australia, and the list goes on, a horse by a different color. Mm-hmm. And to me, it sounds like there's been a global experiment from an alien race for eons and eons, if you look at it today with modern eyes and read it with the knowledge and the technology that we have available now.
And we're finding a lot of that same, hieroglyphs, the same symbolisms, things in all parts of the world. It's really hard to dismiss that.
Okay, so going back into a context that's more familiar with a lot of you, let's start with Abraham and Sarah, the progenitor, father, and mother of the Hebrew tradition, or Brahma and Saraswati, the parents of humanity in the Hindu traditions. In reality, these may be far more ancient figures than we give them credit for, originating from primordial beginnings, just like the Adam and Eve story. In the book of Genesis, Abraham appears following the destruction of an even far more ancient civilization. He's representing a fresh start for humanity. His name, Abraham, means the progenitor of many people, whereas similarly, Brahma means the father of humanity. Abraham, Brahma. And let's look at the name Sarah, then Saraswati. It doesn't take too much of a leap of the imagination to realize this is referring to the same people, Abraham and Sarah. So once again, if you do the research, you realize there was a close encounter between Abraham and Sarah with three sky people, beings from an ethereal realm or from another planet, that results in the artificial insemination and the birth of a new father of humanity, Isaac, the son that's provided to Abraham and Sarah by these three sky gods.
You can almost see the word Abraham in that.
So then from Isaac and Rebekah's generation, there emerges two completely different kinds of people. We have the crafty, wily, ambitious, hairless man, Jacob, who was preceded in birth by only a few seconds from a man who was as strong as an ox, covered in thick hair. He had the ability to walk between worlds, survive entirely in the wild lands, communicate directly with the sky spirits. His name was Esau. And then as they grow older, obviously a lot of you are familiar with the story of how Jacob tricks Esau into giving up his title, his inheritance as firstborn, bribes him with a bowl of stew, lentil soup. If we're going to be specific, that's what it was.
Jacob found favor with his mother. Esau found favor with his father. So as time went on, in an attempt to trick Isaac, and they basically covered Jacob's arm with a hide.
Lamb's wool, I believe.
Lamb's wool, perhaps, yes. In order to allow Isaac to feel that and to think that it was Esau. But it was all a conspiracy. It was all a conniving trick, and basically caused Esau his disinheritance. And some could say it was because he was more concerned about food than his birthright. But do we know that? I don't know.
Stories get misconstrued and twisted around. If I were to tell you a story and 10 minutes later you relay that to another person, and then they relay it to a third person, so on and so forth down the line.
Eventually words change.
So we try to put oral traditions and stories into terms that we understand at the time that we're hearing them. But could this story be the Bible's recollection of two very different types of hominid species originating from alien intervention with their grandparents, an experimental breeding program? This story also parallels the epic of Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu of the Sumerian folklore. There's been an ongoing story of E.T. intervention of people throughout all of ancient history, and it continues on to this day. Another similar story, if we're going to talk about biblical things, is that of Cain and Abel.
And it's believed that they had two different fathers. They were twins, but that they were procreated within, literally days of each other, and one being representative of the good side of man, if you will, and one being pure rotten.
And from the very beginnings, we've been forced into a polarity. We've been forced to view everything black and white, left and right, up and down. Mm-hmm. Disregard and ignore all of the shades of gray in between. The shades of gray make up 99%.
Well, sure, and how much of our lives go by that other people don't know about?
I think that's funny that I termed it that way, considering a lot of the aliens are called the Greys.
Right. These energies are still called them alien, but these energies are still very present as a part of man's experience. The things that would keep us under control, the things that would keep us bound to a limited truth, a limited piece of a pie.
Regardless of which ancient story that you explore, and when you start putting all of them together, all of them are telling the same tales, just from different perspectives, from what they had to work with.
Agreed.
So are aliens responsible for everything? I don't know. That's just a question to throw out there. Do I think our current day Sasquatch are aliens? No. Not in the direct sense that they came off of a spacecraft yesterday. But all of this does present a fairly good argument that in some way all of us are a descendant or mutation from some type of intervention in the past.
Yes.
So with that in mind, the labels you will never hear us attached to the Sasquatch go accordingly like this. We will never call them demigods, Nephilim, demons, or monsters.
No.
Believe me, when you encounter those things, you'll definitely know the difference.
Absolutely.
They are very much a distant and connected branch of our very own lineage.
Yes.
Going back to our primordial beginnings. So regardless of what you call the Bigfoot, or the Sasquatch, or the Yowie, or the abominable snowman, pick a name,
yeah.
a horse by any other color.
Mm-hmm.
They all have some primary characteristics that they share, beyond their obvious large size and hairy body. Almost sounds like I'm talking about myself. They have the ability to mind speak with people that they choose to.
Yes.
They have the ability to cloak or move around, as we would call it, invisible. Mm-hmm. They can walk between dimensions and walk between worlds. Kind of going in line with what they said Esau was capable of doing.
Interesting.
They can at times display the ability to shapeshift into other animals, They have miraculous healing abilities, and they can use them on humans that they choose.
Yes.
Once they bonded with a person, they bonded with them forever unless something drastic happens to create a rift.
They're very loyal to the heart space.
And regardless as to what some say yay and some say nay, the DNA tests that they have ran show that we do have a common mitochondrial sequence.
Yeah, the common factor is the mama.
Mm-hmm. They share information between a collective consciousness, just like we might call the Akashic records.
Mm-hmm. And they seem to know who has passed through various rites of passage in their own lives in order to access certain levels of information. It's not that the information ever goes away, but there are certain measures that we all have to meet up to within ourselves, with or without the people, but they gauge that very closely.
The elders seem to be living libraries of all of Earth's history, mm-hmm. being able to tap into that record system.
Yes.
They can just move through anything at will. A tree, a boulder. They're out in the woods and they see you and they don't want to be seen anymore. They'll walk right into a tree, just like we walk into a door.
Yeah, time-space is not their issue.
They use infrasound. They use ultrasound. They can create feelings of fear, a loss of time. You might lose physical control of your functions. You might go into a catatonic state.
And that's not always, in the way that I've been shown certain things, that's not always something the people are doing to us, as much as it is our natural reaction to certain vibrations. And if these are resonating, in this case, at a high vibration, and our energy field isn't ready to accept that yet, sometimes it does create a rift or a little, what would you call it, a wave mm-hmm. between. And sometimes those waves come in the form of maybe a minute level of chaos, or we go through the same thing in life. But we have to match that vibration in order for it to be exchanged freely. And if we're not ready for it, it's going to show itself.
Yeah, another thought, unless you've actually bonded with one or bonded with a group, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, when you have an encounter just on random chance in the woods, it's a female that's trying to decoy you away from where the young ones are.
Yes.
It's very seldom that you have that interaction with the males.
That's correct.
Until they have
gotten involved.
Yeah, or until they have gauged how you are over the course of time.
Yeah. Or certainly if they feel any threat to their family, then they will get involved. A lot of the ones that we see out in nature also are still considered juvenile, and they're still mastering control over their energies, if you will, in such a way that oftentimes they're more easily seen than those that have that experience or have some age about them.
Sometimes they can appear as an orb or a shimmering figure, or a lot of times people report orbs that happen in proximity to where the Sasquatch are.
Mm-hmm. Anku considers it to be, I believe he called it in one session, the orb path, and it's their quintessential, big word there, big guy, quintessential energy. Call it their spiritual energy. They're the core of who they are. And they very much understand that everything is energy. He happens to be a master of energy and loves to teach about it. But when we're seeing these orbs, these might be the presence of the people coming in, but they haven't taken any kind of form yet. So in the fact that they haven't taken any form yet, they're just showing as the light of who they are. They're just showing the energy of who they are, And then if they move on and they find that tree or they find that right spot where they can go either undetected or in a safe way, being in that orb form actually enables them to be closer to you in a way that's not threatening.
Or terrifying to the viewer.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, most of the type 1s and even the type 2s consider us to be as a brother or a cousin species.
They very often use the term brother, which is the other thing that I find interesting about the story about the twins, because there's this, let's say that were the connection. It's like this,
It always comes back to the brothers.
Yeah.
They're extremely elusive. They prefer to remain unseen most of the time. If they don't want you to see something or know something, you're not going to. If you see them, it's because they wanted it to happen.
Yep.
They can take on the role of teachers and guides, and they have the ability to manipulate any kind of electronic device that they encounter.
Absolutely.
So these are just some thoughts that we wanted to share with everybody today. One of the things that is a consistent is that we all seem to agree to disagree. And the Bigfoot community is by far no exception. Everyone is scratching and clawing, trying to prove that they're right and everybody else is wrong. Can't we just all get along?
Yeah. I guess we have to ask ourselves, what is ultimately the game? What is it that we have to gain by being that one person, that unlocks this great big mystery? I personally am enthralled with the mysteries that are unlocked every day that do not provide man with every little piece like that. I'm tickled to death that science doesn't have this family.
No, and they never will. Just like I said, it's like trying to catch the wind with a butterfly net.
Mm-hmm.
But the Sasquatch know your intentions. They know your agenda. And if you're only in it for the monetary gain and the glory, you might as well just go home and watch something else on TV.
They're amazing people. And what they have to teach is just incredible. And I feel like a lot of these that we, are often call them UFOs or different encounters that people have. I don't feel like they're all as bad as what certain forms of media or certain things would try to instill in us.
It's all part of the whitewash, the cover-up conspiracies. Keep us dumb and stupid and in the dark, just like a mushroom, and keep feeding us crap. That's the way they want it to be.
Yeah.
Well, with all that being said, we're glad you stopped along with us today. We're going to wrap it up for now. We'll catch you farther down the trail. Thanks.
Bye-bye.